Pictured here are foods that are typically found in the American cupboard. Over here, we see foods that have been grown in the garden, purchased from farmers markets, and other sustainable sources. We have a problem here in the U.S., a big problem. Alexandra Cousteau, a dedicated environmentalist, says that only about 1 in 5 fishers and shrimpers in the Gulf of Mexico can still make a living because of food choices that you make every day. Food choices to support industrialized agricultural practices. The way we produce corn here in the Midwest is affecting lives in other parts of the world, including in the Gulf of Mexico. I've seen the dead zone with my own eyes. Now see it with yours. In 2009, I took a trip with friends of mine to the Gulf of Mexico. We drove down to the Gulf. We saw things we'd never seen before. We did things that weren't exactly studying, but we tried a lot of foods that are typically found there, like alligator and grits. We camped on the beach, but we couldn't swim, even on the beautiful beach. And we saw a lot of dead things. More dead things than are usually found on the beach. What we found was the dead zone. This is the dead zone from space. I don't blame the farmers. My grandfather is a farmer in Iowa, and I've conducted IRB certified anthropological research with farmers talking about how financially difficult it is to not grow food the way that they do. But the method of production is what's causing the disaster. Naturally, even in the rich soils of Iowa, it's impossible to grow corn the way that we do. Corn that's found in some of those typical American foods. Farmers pump the land full of nitrogen, which runs off into creeks, and then into streams, and then into rivers, and finally into the mighty Mississippi, where it collects downstream, forming the dead zone, which you just saw pictures of. I want you to realize that the cheap cost of food isn't really so cheap. It's actually expensive on our environment and on our health. These are called externalized costs by economists. So to use an analogy, it's sort of like paying on a credit card and paying interest every month instead of paying in full. You'll end up paying much more in the long run. To understand the high cost of cheap food, let's examine a predicament with a typical American food paradigm. Do you know where your food comes from? No, I don't mean which grocery store you purchased it from. I mean how it got to where it was produced to where you purchased it from. It's not easy to trace the lines from how the food got from where it was produced to your plate or your fast food bag. This process hides some negative externalities on our environment and also on our health, including the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So while multinational corporations profit, we all share these costs collectively. Meyer and Duffy, economists at Iowa State University, agree. They say that livestock production alone in the U.S. costs Americans $740 million in externalized costs. This includes the loss of biodiversity, such as in the dead zone, and also degradation to natural resources like water. Once all that nitrogen runoff gets to the bottom of the Mississippi, immense growth of algae occurs. This is hypoxia. They use up all of the oxygen and kill life that used to thrive there, including the shrimp and the fish. Cousteau says that this spot was the size of New Jersey in 2008, and in every year it grows bigger. While we're all bearing the cost, and multinational corporations profit immensely. Another issue with the American food paradigm is that we don't understand the energy that goes into producing food. Being so separated from the natural production leaves us unable to grasp the amount of energy that goes into producing it. Human labor is one aspect of this. Migrant workers most likely pick your strawberries and tomatoes, says Eric Schlossler, an investigative journalist. And they're not doing it in a means which is much different from other plantation workers of the past, slaves, shows a special report conducted by the ecologist. Now that you all see the problem of not knowing where our food comes from, the depressing part of the presentation is over. So let's get a bit optimistic and see the solution. Locally produced foods are necessary to combat these multinational corporation-dominated food systems. Farmers markets are becoming much more prevalent across the U.S., says the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And beyond the obvious benefits of a place to purchase food, they also act as a social networking means of connecting other people with a similar paradigm of food, locavores. Community-supported agriculture, CSAs, are another means to connect one group of people who share a similar way of viewing food. From an interview I conducted with a CSA farmer in 2009, many people who hold a share in CSAs eventually will start to grow their own garden. Personal gardens also create a connection with the natural process of food production, and they're a great source of financially cheap foods. These three options differ from the norm in the U.S., but with support from TV chef Jamie Oliver and First Lady Michelle Obama, they are gradually becoming more popularly known. Farmers markets, CSAs, and personal gardens bring more than just food. They bring a new way of viewing food. This paradigm is against the norm, but supported by environmentalists and health professionals alike. Dr. Jennifer Matthews, a pediatrician and specialist in childhood and teen obesity, says another problem with our American food paradigm is that heavily processed foods are everywhere and heavily marketed to kids. Just spend a while watching cartoons with your kids. How can they resist the bombardment of cool ads for sugary cereals, sizzling hot chips, and high fructose corn syrup sweetened beverages? These foods are produced as a result of industrialized agriculture. These foods have become normal to consume. She also insists that good food has become more expensive, deterring families with budgets from purchasing them. Then again, let's go back to the beginning, the analogy with the credit card. Wholesome, local, good foods may seem more expensive up front, but in the long run, cheap foods have a high environmental cost and a very high cost on our health. Our personal health is agreeably important. What proactive steps do you currently take to maintain your health? Hippocrates eminently alleged, "Let thy food be thy medicine." We tend to separate the two in American culture. It's a dichotomous split, and it's part of our American food paradigm, and a part we almost unconsciously do not second guess. Now, y'all must eat. We all do. Every day that you make a choice to eat food, which has a negative cost on our environment, a negative impact on your personal health, is a day you could have changed your behavior. But it's never too late to make a change, and it doesn't have to be a gigantic leap. Take baby steps. This problem won't be solved overnight, but these steps add up in the long run. I urge you all to check out your local farmers markets, talk to farmers, and connect with people who produce food. Follow the chain from the way it's produced to your plate. We all get super busy living this industrial lifestyle with work, school, kids, and everything else, but does that mean that you also must eat a super industrialized dinner? Back to the Hippocrates quote, "Please let your food be your medicine." The same medicine is the cure for many environmental problems as well, which is my main point that I'd like to close with. Realizing the connection of you to your food that you eat, which is necessary energy, connects us to our local communities, but also symbolically to our natural environments. Externalized cost of America's subsidized yet cheap food paradigm make how we produce food and consume food terribly expensive, and it's time for an alternative. Local food. Thank you.